Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually for our presentation on redefining a library's journal hosting service. My name is Mariya Maistrovskaya, and I'm a digital publishing librarian at the University of Toronto Libraries, where I manage, among other things, the UTL journal production services. And with me today is Priscilla Carmini, our graduate student library assistant and the editor-in-chief of the Faculty of Information's iJournal. We're joining you today from the traditional territories of Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and gather on these territories. We encourage you to take a moment today to discover the Indigenous territory you are on at nativeland.ca. Today, we will talk about our experience with bringing journal hosting services in alignment with the institution's open access support criteria and best practices in scholarly publishing, assessing the support that hosted journals need to meet these criteria, and adding new resources, services, and workflows to fill the gaps in our service. A couple of words about our context. The University of Toronto is a large institution, and the library is the third largest library system in North America. The Journal Production Services hosts 53 actively publishing journals, of which about half are led by faculty and the other half by students. They're hosted on OJS, which is provided for us by the Ontario Council of University Library Consortium. My back of the napkin estimate of the FTE support that the service gets is about 70%, including librarians and staff across 3 campuses, student assistant, and system support. We provide hosting to U of T journals at no cost, and GPS does not position itself as a publisher. The service started as a DIY solution where the library would set up the journal and provide tech support, and the journal is on their own to do the rest. Our only hosting eligibility criteria are U of T affiliation and making some or all of the journal's content openly accessible. And that's how we ended up with a few journals with a moving paywall, including a 10-year paywall, journals with no ISSN, etc. Additional services and support have been added over the past few years, such as DOIs, ORCID, archiving, but there has been no formal check-in process or discussion about maintaining a certain level of publishing quality. By comparison, a couple of years ago, the UTL adopted open access support criteria that we use when considering funding for external open access ventures. They include criteria such as openness, discoverability, quality, etc. I was rather struck by the discrepancy between these two sets of criteria and the legacy hosting criteria not fully reflecting the library's aim to support high-quality open access publishing. And that's how the idea of aligning these criteria was born. In 2019, we established a TriCampus working group that looked at revising the hosting criteria to align them with the library's open access support criteria and best practices in scholarly publishing. Our high-level goals were to support high-quality open access publishing at U of T and help our journals get to the point where they would be eligible for DOAJ inclusion. We also had to balance quality requirements with attainability for faculty and student journals. We did not want the new criteria to close doors for journals that would have nowhere else to go for hosting. In 2020, the draft revised criteria and service agreement were completed. The key changes included the requirement to publish open access under an open access license, as well as to follow the best practices in journal publishing that I have here on the slide. The list ended up pretty extensive, so we put it in an appendix to the service agreement. The draft revised document was circulated to the larger TriCampus Scholarly Communications Committee for feedback, and following that, it was passed to the library's exec for review, which unfortunately has been significantly delayed during the pandemic, so we don't have the finalized version to show you just yet. But in the meantime, we also discussed implementing these changes and agreed that they would apply to new journals only. However, we would also contact existing journals and offer our support with transition to open access and following publishing best practices. And as we were discussing, we couldn't help but wonder whether we are providing enough support and resources for our journals to meet these criteria and follow the best practices. And to find that out, we decided to ask the journals themselves, and that's where I'm passing it over to Priscilla.
Thank you, Mariya. We decided to create and disseminate a survey to assess the strengths and weaknesses of our current service and better understand the gaps in our service providings. Through this survey, we hoped to invite our editors to contribute to the improvement of our service. Our survey, distributed through our JPS listserv, included 20 questions total with a combination of stakeholder profile questions and questions about our service offerings. Stakeholder profile questions allowed us to see who was responding to our survey and understand their progress towards their journal's goals. Our JPS service questions were designed to assess the usefulness of our current service offerings and gauge interest in our ideas for future programming. We also provided our respondents with the opportunity to schedule a call with us to further discuss feedback. We received 12 responses to our survey. The majority of our survey respondents were editors from student and faculty journals holding senior editing roles, such as editor-in-chief or managing editor. Our editors faced many obstacles, including high levels of staff turnover, a lack of funding, issues with peer review and discoverability, and an overall heavy workload. We were also interested in our editors' goals for their publication. Some examples include meeting provincial accessibility standards, indexing in the DOAJ, implementing identifiers, accessing funding, and an increased readership and submission. Editors evaluated their progress based on the number and quality of submissions, their team's ability to adhere to deadlines, feedback from their readers, and impact factor. Finally, our journal editors responded positively to our OJS tech support and free DOI service, and were interested in increased access to webinars and resources. This slide shows a summary of responses regarding future JPS service offerings, such as webinars, resource guides, JPS journal community calls, and goal-setting meetings with JPS staff. As you can see, more interest was expressed for webinars and resource guides, and less interest was expressed in community calls and goal-setting meetings. Based on the results of our survey, we concluded that we needed to refocus our attention on a few key items. Firstly, we needed to streamline communication, as we noticed that in our survey, multiple editors were asking for JPS resources and services that were already announced or currently available. Previously, our communication was sporadic and unsystematic. We would email our editors through our listserv as opportunities arose. We also recognized that very few, if any, of our editors checked the listserv archive to follow up on these opportunities. Also, if editorial staff emails changed due to turnover, it was possible that our journals were missing our communications altogether. Furthermore, we asked our editors to identify their preferred mode of communication. We quickly realized, given how divided the responses were, that no mode of communication would work for all our editors. We concluded that we needed to implement a more systematic approach to our communication methods and create a space on our website where editors can access information about resources, events, and tips shared through our listserv. Our responses also indicated that there was a greater need for continuing education in journal publishing. Because journal publishing, especially student journal publishing, is such a niche subject, we realized that we had to work to create learning opportunities catered to the needs of our editors. Finally, based on our editors' high workloads, we decided that any programming we created needed to be easy to access and use. In fact, the pandemic worked in our favor as we were able to develop programming for remote learning, which is more easily accessible for our editors who are not based in Toronto. As a result of our survey, we have implemented a number of key changes to our service offerings. Firstly, we have made an effort to add new resources and update current items in our journal publishing guide. Rather than creating resources, our guide serves as a means to connect our editors to useful original resources, such as the Student Journal Toolkit or the Getting Found, Staying Found guide on PKP. We have also since created a quarterly newsletter to keep our editors up to date about the services we currently provide, announcements, and any future workshops or events held by JPS or externally through other institutions. Finally, we have developed a series of 30-minute webinars titled OJS Tips and Tricks, which provides editors with simple tips that can be easily implemented in their publishing workflows. We have since presented 3 of these webinars. We also host hour-long workshops for more complex topics. All of our webinars and previous recordings can be found on our events page. Now I'm passing it over to Mariya, who will take us through our next steps.
All right, so it's back to me for a wrap-up. Our next steps include having the revised service agreement approved by the library's exec, taking the best practices appendix from the service agreement and transforming it into an easy-to-follow online checklist where each item would have resources and examples. That work is actually almost done. We also want to use that checklist as a checkpoint for journals that are about to launch before we make them public to ensure that they have all the necessary information on their website. And credit for this idea goes to Stephanie Savage from UBC. We are still working out how to do regular check-ins in a way that would not come across as us policing our journals. One of the ideas we had was to add self-assessment opportunities that would let the journals assess their progress towards publishing best practices themselves, rather than us assessing them. This is still work in progress. And finally, following the successful Canada-wide virtual Student Journal Forum 2021 that was organized by several Canadian libraries, we were discussing among those libraries opening up the workshops that we host for journals internally to the larger Canadian audience to make it more efficient and collaborative. That is it for us. We will be happy to take questions during the question time or answer them via email. Thank you.